Imagine standing on a battlefield where the forces of heaven clash with the shadows of darkness, and at the center, a mighty angel raises his sword, shining with divine light. This is Michael, the Archangel, the commander of God's armies, the protector of his people, and the one who carries out the ultimate victory over evil. What does the Bible really tell us about his role in Revelation? And how does it connect to the call for our souls to reflect God's purity? Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will transform the way you see spiritual warfare and Christ's care for you. Welcome to Divine War Stories, the channel where we explore the epic battles of heaven, the triumph of God's angels, and the lessons we can apply to our own lives. Here, every story is rooted in Scripture, every lesson points to Christ, and every moment reminds us that God's plan is bigger than any challenge we face. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story that strengthens your faith and guides your steps. In the book of Revelation, Michael is more than a warrior. He is the protector of God's people, the one called to confront the forces that oppose the Almighty. His role shows us that spiritual strength is not just about power, but about commitment to God's will. Like a shepherd guarding his flock, Michael acts in ways that reflect God's care for our souls, emphasizing the importance of turning away from sin and striving for lives that honor the Creator. The call to live in alignment with God's standards may seem impossible, yet Christ gives it because he values our hearts more than anything. Michael's battles in Revelation are symbolic of the fight each believer faces daily. Temptation, pride, and worldly desires are constant enemies, and Christ calls us to resist them as he resists evil. Just as Michael confronts the devil, we are asked to confront the choices that harm our spiritual health. This is not about achieving perfection but about recognizing the treasure of our soul and committing to nurturing it in ways that reflect God's character, prioritizing righteousness over fleeting pleasures. The scriptures describe Michael standing firm against the dragon, a representation of Satan. This imagery teaches us that opposition is inevitable, but with God's guidance, victory is assured. The concept of divine purity, though challenging, is about aligning our lives with what Christ values: compassion, truth, and justice. When we resist sin, even imperfectly, we echo Michael's courage, demonstrating that our actions, guided by Christ, hold eternal significance. In the Bible, angels often serve as messengers, but Michael is depicted as a warrior with authority. His strength reminds us that God equips those who seek him with wisdom and resolve. Christ's commands for moral integrity are rooted not in judgment alone but in his love for our souls. When we avoid sin and embrace virtuous living, we participate in the spiritual victories God orchestrates, ensuring that our choices reflect his divine purpose rather than the fleeting attractions of the world. Michael's confrontation with evil in Revelation parallels Christ's call to prioritize the kingdom over earthly desires. Just as the archangel's sword is decisive, our commitment to living righteously cuts through distractions and temptations. God knows our limitations, yet he invites us to strive for hearts that seek him above all. By choosing Christ over sin, even imperfectly, we honor the immeasurable value of the soul he entrusted to us, making our spiritual journey meaningful in the midst of struggle. The imagery of Michael throwing the dragon down from heaven reminds us of the consequences of rejecting evil. Christ teaches that sin separates us from God, yet his call to righteousness is always coupled with mercy. Even when we fail, he urges us to rise again, to pursue what aligns with his character. Understanding this dynamic helps us see that striving for spiritual integrity is not legalism but a reflection of God's care, an active participation in the protection and growth of our own soul. Michael's leadership in Revelation is not solitary. It involves coordinating with other angels under God's command. Similarly, Christ calls us into community, where believers support one another in resisting sin and living faithfully. Churches that embody Christ's teaching on service, charity, and moral guidance mirror Michael's example of coordinated action. By participating in such communities, we experience God's protection and learn to live in ways that glorify him, reinforcing our spiritual journey with accountability and encouragement. In facing the dragon, Michael acts decisively and without hesitation. Christ's call to live righteously requires the same courage, urging us to confront behaviors that harm our spiritual well-being. The emphasis is on transformation, not perfection. Each step away from sin is a step toward the fullness of life God intends. When we reflect on these battles, we are reminded that Christ values the health of our souls above all else, and every effort to live rightly matters infinitely in his eyes. Michael's role also illustrates that spiritual battles are real and significant, yet not impossible. Christ's call for a life oriented toward goodness may feel overwhelming, but divine guidance equips us with discernment, perseverance, and strength. Just as Michael cannot act apart from God, we cannot navigate temptation and moral challenges apart from him. Embracing this partnership allows us to grow, resist harmful impulses, and prioritize the soul's eternal value over temporary satisfaction, learning to live in alignment with God's plan. Finally, Michael's example demonstrates that obedience and vigilance are essential. In Revelation, he maintains focus on God's mission, never allowing distractions or pride to interfere. Similarly, Christ calls believers to live purposefully, avoiding sin's allure while embracing virtues that reflect his love. By observing these principles, our lives become testimonies of God's care and guidance, illustrating that spiritual battles, though challenging, are opportunities to honor him, strengthen our hearts, and protect the treasure of our souls. As Michael leads the heavenly armies, we see a vivid picture of God's concern for each of us. Christ calls us to be attentive to our hearts, to turn away from choices that dull the soul, and to embrace actions that reflect his character. Living rightly is not about rigid rules, but about valuing what is eternal over what is fleeting. When we resist selfishness, dishonesty, and pride, we align with God's vision for our lives, and even small steps toward goodness have eternal significance, echoing the decisive courage Michael displays in the spiritual realm. Michael's struggle against the dragon is a call to self-examination. The Archangel does not waver in his duty, and Christ asks us to take our own spiritual responsibility seriously. This means recognizing sin when it arises, confessing it, and turning toward God's ways. Christ knows we cannot achieve absolute perfection, yet his commands are not burdens. They are invitations to protect the soul he values above all. Just as Michael acts in God's authority, we act under Christ's guidance, bringing light into a world that often embraces darkness. In Revelation, Michael casts down evil from heaven, showing the consequences of rebellion. Christ's teaching similarly warns that sin has a cost, but his guidance is always rooted in love. Choosing what is good protects our hearts and enables us to flourish in ways that echo God's design. Every act of kindness, honesty, or courage aligns us with divine purposes, demonstrating that living a life shaped by Christ is more than duty. It is a reflection of God's protective and nurturing care for our most precious possession, our soul. Michael's authority is given by God, reminding us that true strength comes from submission to divine will. Christ's call to purity is not about self-righteousness. It is about letting his wisdom direct our steps. In resisting temptation, we learn that the soul's value surpasses temporary pleasures or worldly recognition. Living with intentionality and awareness of God's presence transforms ordinary choices into acts that honor him, echoing the vigilance and courage Michael exemplifies in the celestial battle against evil forces. The imagery of Michael fighting the dragon inspires a deeper understanding of spiritual vigilance. Christ calls us to monitor our thoughts, words, and actions, guarding our lives against patterns that harm the soul. Even though perfection is beyond reach, striving to align with God's will demonstrates a heart responsive to his care. Every decision to resist sin mirrors Michael's boldness, reinforcing that spiritual growth is a daily, active process, where obedience and awareness shape lives that reflect Christ's love and justice. Michael's triumph in Revelation is not a solitary victory. It involves heavenly coordination and steadfast focus on God's mission. Christ's guidance similarly encourages believers to find support within communities that reflect his teachings. Churches that preach the gospel, serve the needy, and foster moral integrity mirror Michael's example of disciplined action. By joining such communities, we find encouragement, accountability, and practical opportunities to practice Christ's love through service, echoing the protective and guiding role of the Archangel in our own lives. In every confrontation, Michael remains resolute, demonstrating the importance of consistent spiritual focus. Christ asks the same from us, to keep our eyes on what is eternal and to resist distractions that lead us astray. When we prioritize the soul over momentary indulgence, we honor the Creator's plan and recognize our true worth. The battles Michael fights remind us that vigilance, courage, and obedience are not abstract ideals. They are practical tools for living faithfully, ensuring that our choices resonate with God's heart and protect the treasure of our inner life. Michael's role also reminds us that God's care extends beyond victory. It encompasses guidance, protection, and restoration. Christ's call to moral and spiritual integrity is equally comprehensive. He encourages confession, reflection, and redirection when we falter. The soul's value surpasses all material gain, and Christ's commands exist to nurture it, not burden it. Each act of turning toward righteousness, each moment of resisting sin, mirrors Michael's protective stance, teaching us that spiritual discipline is ultimately an expression of God's immense love for us. The battle Michael fights illustrates the spiritual tension present in all lives. Christ's call to pursue goodness amidst temptation is not meant to discourage but to instruct, shaping our hearts to recognize what is truly valuable. By embracing God's guidance, resisting sin, and striving to reflect divine virtues, we participate in the same divine order that Michael enforces in heaven. Even imperfect steps toward righteousness hold eternal significance, revealing that Christ values the condition and health of our soul above all, inviting us to engage actively in the spiritual journey. Finally, Michael's story in Revelation culminates in victory, but it also teaches participation. Christ invites us to embrace his teachings, read the scriptures daily, and engage in communities that serve and uplift others. Seek a church that not only preaches his message but acts through charity, helping orphans, widows, and the needy, reflecting Christ's example. Every choice to live rightly, every act of kindness, mirrors Michael's courage and Christ's concern for the soul, reminding us that we are called to protect, nurture, and honor the treasure we carry within, living in a way that glorifies God's eternal love.